This new paradigm called for that trust to be placed in the gifts of the whole people, including the laity. Instead of making that shift in trust, however, most of the hierarchy and many parish clergy redefined the established institutional structures and norms as ways of conforming with that new paradigm. Instead of changing the way they did things, in other words, they simply changed the rhetoric in which they describe them. What's this got to do with the signs of the times, which is part of the title of my talk here, which at times are going to permit me to go into too much. But just this, what do we mean by the experience of the people? Experience of what? It's experience of the crises that arise within their own lives and the lives of the wider world in which they live. That, according to Theology and Revelation of Vatican II, is the source of God's voice to the entire world in the here and now. And it is that those who are living through those times and in those situations live their Christian life by interpreting and responding to. Now, it's not, therefore, a job reserved to a particular caste who enjoy privileges and authority that not only separated from, but are largely unaccountable to the church at large. It's one shared by the entire community. And this is, I'll conclude on this note, the failure of the church to recognise that fact and to reform its structures in the light of that theology, and thereby also suppressing to that degree the charism that inspired the Cardine movement, is, in my opinion, the remote but most highly significant cause of the present pedophilia crisis that confronts our church. If you, power corrupts. If you distribute power in a manner that's so out of whack as we've got it distributed within the Catholic Church now, then the price you pay is corruption. And the kind of corruption that we're having exposed to us by secular authorities is of the most grotesque kind that we in our lifetime have perhaps witnessed within the internal life of the church. And therefore, if we are to reform the church in conformity with the call of the gospel and to do anything to heal the present state of affairs, then we've got to read the signs of the times and restructure ourselves accordingly.
Thanks, Mike. We've got time for a couple of questions. Mike?
2 questions, Mick. In the axing of the priest worker, was there any theological reason given? Secondly, fundamental to addressing your issues is the Church returning to Luther and the Protestant Reformation, where community is placed at the centre of God's revelation to the world.
I don't know the answer to your first question. You might have more of a clue than me.
I am not aware of any theological reason that priests could not be workers. I think it was a practical decision. That may well have been the case. I don't know. But in relation to the second one, clearly the universal priesthood that Luther insisted upon has the same biblical foundation as the priesthood of the people that Vatican II insisted upon. I mean, we spent the entire Counter-Reformation trying to define ourselves in opposition
to the Protestants. And as in any political situation, what that does is to neglect the truth in the position of one's opponents. That is not an evangelical way of addressing the mission of the church. The church is here to serve the world. It's not here to make enemies. And that you can't change history. I would be too glib, but please God, we can now acknowledge and not fear that we are diminishing ourselves by doing so, the truth in Luther's position.
Thanks, Mark. One quick question I've got time for.
Well, I agree. I was in Cardinal was paying lip service to the political game had to play in the period of modernism to get his movement established. But given his method of siege, Jack, which included gospel reflection, and given there's the biblical renaissance that started in Germany in the 1850s, and there was strong dialogue between the Lutheran theologians and the Catholics who they could become, which he would have been fully aware of. The minute you start getting a lay person looking at the gospel rather than looking at traditions or what authority says, where Jesus says, and in the synoptic says 60 examples, and in synoptic gospel, Jesus saying, this is where the church is, not there, this is where the church is. Surely Cardinal was unaware of what was really going to happen, that these young workers would suddenly discover, hey, there's authority in the blind and the poor and the sick and the lame, which Jesus constantly, and the other in the gospel, Jesus is criticising the hierarchy of the day. So surely Cardinal was fully aware that every time they sat as a group and looked at that gospel, they were quickly going to pick up where Jesus' message really was.
Well, Cardine was certainly fully aware of the gospel message and the way that you presented it there. He was certainly aware also of the scholarship that was going on. But the dilemma that he had to live, and the dilemma that the church of his day had to live too, was the fact that power within the church rested within a hierarchy, that it insisted that revelation, that all these biblical passages that you're referring to could only be authentically interpreted ultimately by the hierarchy of the church. And so anything that Cardine did that smacked of a challenge to the authority of the hierarchy was likely to get his movement suppressed in the same way that Songers was suppressed before him. He would have been condemned as a modernist too, had he not been prepared to bend before the authority of the existing regime.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Mark, for our next speakers, all the way from Queensland, David Kennedy and Leahy, who are going to talk to us about broad-based community organising.
Well, we can't use them together. If one cuts out the other, that's going to make it feedback. So, okay.
David is a community organiser for the Queensland Community Alliance. He worked for the YCW in Brisbane and served the YCS as a national coordinator and the international secretary general. Leahy is also a community organiser for the Queensland Community Alliance. She's worked as national coordinator of YCS and has recently graduated in arts law from the University of Adelaide. Thanks, Leahy.
Can I use your microphone?
Hi everyone, thanks for having me and David along. We'd like to begin by acknowledging the land and the owners of where we stand, the Wurundjeri people, and pay our respects to owners past and present. Looking forward to a shared future of reconciliation together. So a bit about me. I joined the Young Christian Students Movement in Year 9 in 2006. Continued in the movement before working for 4 years within YCS. I recently finished uni and feel a real sense of passion and excitement about what broad-based organising can offer the world, using some some of my experiences of Cartine spirituality.
Thanks, Lee. So I'm David Kennedy, or many of you would know me as David O'Brien. And I guess I finished working for the National ICS. I'd been travelling around Australia for over 3 years, living out of a backpack, and was pretty burnt out. Went away from being involved in the movement for a year or so, and then I was flying over to Perth, and I was rereading Cartine's speech to the English chaplains. And in talking about the spirituality of don't wait in the church and go out and meet the young workers and talk to them about their lives. And I got the fire in the belly again. And I had been being asked to nominate for the international team. And I had about 3 times said, no, that's not for me. They came back and asked again. And so when I got this fire in the belly again, I thought, well, maybe that's what I'm being called to. And I spent a fair while thinking about it and praying and discerning it, and I felt that call to the spirituality of the movement. So I nominated, and I went over to our World Council in India, and I got elected as the International Secretary General. And then about a year or so in, I started to think, did I get that right? Maybe I got that wrong. And as I prayed and discerned it more, I started to come to a realization that it's a little bit like the story of St. Francis, of needing to get the call wrong in order to get it more fully right. And so the story, when St. Francis hears from God, go and rebuild my church, and he goes down the road and he gets the bricks and he builds the church. And he goes, yep, I'm done, God. What next? And God says, no. And so eventually Francis goes, oh, the church, Okay. And so what I realised is I did something a little bit similar in that I got that excitement, I got that fire in the belly and that sense of calling to the spirituality and the mission of the movement, and I went straight back to doing it in the structure that I knew. And my realisation was that actually the call is to find new structures, new ways, new vehicles, as we put it in this presentation, of bringing the spirituality and the mission of the movement to life. And so I guess as we go over that today, part of the benefit of doing this was to give myself a deadline to try and articulate some of that. But knowing what we know now about the history of the Sion movement, what we've heard today from Chiara about Victor Kapp, realising that reimagining our tradition as Joseph is actually a core part of our tradition. And so that's where we kind of want to situate ourselves to start with. Austin Ivory, the British Catholic journalist and advisor, talks about the way that Catholic social teaching is like a roadmap and a fuel, but one of the reasons that it has struggled to be well implemented across most countries of the world is that there's no vehicle to do that. And I would argue that for a long time in this country, that vehicle was there, and that vehicle was the YCS and the YCW. But we do not have the movements with the capacity to be that vehicle today. And so Austin's argument and my argument, and this goes back to Brian Lawrence and Greg Crafter and I going and seeing Austin in London, but is that community organising is that vehicle for the modern context, for a pluralistic modern context, to bring social teaching to life. So when we say broad-based community organising, we're talking about bringing together churches and other faith groups with unions, community organisations and ethnic associations, working together for the common good, taking public action, and committed to the role, committed to strengthening those organisations as mediating institutions. So in Australia, that's the Sydney Alliance and the Queensland Community Alliance, which we both work for, which is about to be founded at the end of August. And there are some nascent conversations in Melbourne, Adelaide and Canberra. But we'll show you a short video, which I'll have to get out of that screen, from Citizens UK, which is the community organising alliance in the UK. That is the best example of this tradition. No, we need to go out. Okay. Sorry, guys. Someone close it.
Want your vote. Community organisers, they don't want your vote. They don't take any public money. Instead, they bring professional organising skills to help the little people working with churches and mosques, schools,